Mr. President, I rise to talk about the significance of today, the 11th of January, the 21st day of the partial government shutdown. Today, we tie for the longest shutdown in the history of the United States government. Tomorrow, we'll set a record for the longest shutdown. Today is the first paycheck day where 800,000+ federal employees will not be paid. In fact, some have already started to get their paychecks, because even when there's no pay, the process of producing the check and the stub continues. And so people get paychecks, but there's a zero in the line, which is sort of like pouring salt in a wound or insult to injury. It's one thing not to be paid, but it's another thing to be working and then get the stub and have there be zero there. And people have already reported, some of our air traffic controllers and TSA professionals and others, that they're starting to receive those checks. January 11 is also a time where I know what it's like in my family. My wife and I kind of load up on both the charitable contributions and buying gifts for our family in December, and then that credit card bill in January is the biggest one that we pay all year. Families are receiving those. January tends to be among the coldest months of the year, where heating bills are the highest. We're going to have a cold snap and maybe a snowstorm in Washington this weekend, and those bills will be high. January 11th is a time where a lot of families sit around kitchen tables and strike tuition checks for the spring semester for their kids to be in school. It's precisely the worst time to have a shutdown of this kind that affects more than 800,000 people and jeopardizes their livelihood. I stand on the floor today to repeat what I said Tuesday night, when many of us stood here and said it's really time to end this shutdown. The House wants to end it. An increasing number of senators want to end it by passing bills that are right here on the Senate, available for consideration to reopen government and to engage with the President in a meaningful, short-term, prompt dialogue about border security and immigration reform. But I want to just share some stories that are flooding into my office, and I'll be back on the floor later because at 11 o'clock, Senator Warner and I will be with federal employees at a community center in Alexandria, and I'll be bringing more stories back to the floor before we adjourn at 1 o'clock today. Before I share stories, I do want to express appreciation to the Majority Leader, to the Republicans and the Democrats who joined together with us yesterday to pass an important bill, Senate Bill 24, which is a bill that's not as good as getting a paycheck, but it is a bill to tell those who have lost paychecks or are losing paychecks during this time, when we reopen, you will be paid. In the past, we have done that. Once we reopen, we figured out a way to do that. But I felt like it was important on the day when people are not being paid for them to at least get the signal from Congress, some certainty, something that they might be able to show to a landlord or to a bank. I am going to get paid. And the Senate Majority Leader and Minority Leader worked at the end of the day to make sure that a UC to pass Senate Bill 24 was successful, and it was. At about 5 o'clock last night, we sent that bill to the House. My understanding is the House is taking the bill up this morning. Senator McConnell, I applaud him also for reaching out to the White House and speaking directly with the President about the bill, and the President indicated that he would sign it when the bill gets to him. Again, it's not as good as a paycheck, but it adds a little something on a tough day to tell people that they can rest assured that when we figure this out, they will be made whole. So I do want to express appreciation to all for working on that yesterday. But again, that is not a cessation of the pain. I'm going to read stories from federal employees, but I do want to acknowledge that this is not just 800,000 employees, it's also millions of Americans. I told a story on the floor Tuesday night about, just coincidentally 2 Saturdays ago, going to 4 different units of the National Park System under the Department of Interior, or the National Forest System under the Department of Agriculture, and being turned away by a gate closed and a sign saying we're shut down. And that I was turned away was of no moment, but I was just interested to watch other families pull up in their vehicles on a Saturday, spending time with their kids. Time with the family is precious. you often don't get a lot of it. Sometimes driving with kids a long way to get to a national park or something, they're squabbling in the back seat and you're really hoping to get there. And watching families pull up and looking at their faces as they saw that what they hoped to do that day they couldn't do because it was closed, that made an impression on me. People trying to visit the museums here in Washington who can't. Citizens who are falling into hunger, who want to apply for food stamps. 95% of the workforce that processes food stamp applications have been furloughed during this time. Air traffic controllers, they're working because they're essential, but it's got to make you a little cranky to get a paycheck with a zero in it. And I can't imagine of a federal employee that I would less like to be cranky than an air traffic controller. I mean, this is like really important stuff. You don't want an air traffic controller sitting in that tower thinking about anything other than air safety. And if 5% of their brain is, they're sort of mad at this shutdown, and 20% of their brain is, how am I going to pay the bill? Air traffic controllers have shared this. They need security clearances to do their jobs. Do you know if your credit is impaired and you start to get hit on your credit report, that can endanger your security clearance? It can, in some circumstances, lead to your security clearance being taken away. If you are under a court order to pay alimony or child support and you can't, regardless of whether you have a good reason or not, and then there's a court order forcing you to, that can lead you to lose your security clearance. So you don't want somebody in the tower of air traffic control worrying about anything other than the safety of the passenger. And if they're mad at government for shutting down and they're anxious about not getting a paycheck and they're wondering about how long it will go on and what the consequences might be, that is not something that makes me feel comfortable. So this is an issue about federal workers, certainly, but it's also an issue about the effect on Americans who need all kinds of services. Like every office here, my office has been flooded with expressions of concern. Senator, why can't you do something? What's going on? How long is this going to go on? And I don't have a good answer for them. But let me just read some stories. I read 7 or 8 Tuesday night, and these are stories that have come in since Tuesday. Shane from Alexandria. I'm a veteran and a furloughed government employee working for the Peace Corps. My wife is a disabled veteran, and we live paycheck to paycheck. I lost my job during the housing crisis, and we lost our home and then relocated to the D.C. area for work. We've worked hard to build our lives back up again and now own a home again, but that's all in jeopardy. If I don't get paid, we can't pay the mortgage and we'll lose our home. I relocated my family from Florida for a secure job here and to provide financial stability to my family. Now, because of a dysfunctional government, I may have to find new work again, but it may not be in time to save our home. Please, please, please do what you can to open the government back up. Terry from Fairfax. I'm writing you along with my other elected congressional representatives seeking your help in bringing the government shutdown to an immediate end. Today is day 19. This was sent to us on Wednesday and counting with no end in sight. The information put out by media saying the number of those affected by this partial government shutdown is 800,000. I submit to you it's much higher than that, especially in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Currently, I work for the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA at Washington Dulles International Airport. I have the compliance department enforcing the Code of Federal Regulations, and I have 15 people working for me. We make sure the nation's transportation system at Washington Dulles is secure and safe, and we're exempt from furlough. Of the 15 people that work for me, most live paycheck to paycheck. As you can imagine, with the outlook of no paycheck coming this Saturday, the morale was starting to go down. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I hope I'm saying that right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is kicking in, that of self-preservation. Their focus is switching from their work, keeping things secure and safe, to their family and how they're going to provide for them and survive. As for me, I served honorably in the United States Coast Guard and retired after 26 years. I started working at Washington Dulles when TSA first stood up, and I've been there over 16 years. I'm 63 years old. My Coast Guard retired paycheck is my financial security, something to fall back on, something I can plan on up until now. I just learned yesterday there won't be a retirement check for Coast Guard retirees because of the shutdown. The financial security we work for is no longer there. This is a breach of trust between the U.S. government and every Coast Guard retiree, and it's wrong. I've proudly served the American people for more than 42 years, and I've been through every government shutdown since 1976. This particular one is getting old in a hurry. It may be the worst, and it needs to stop. For my people at work, my family at home, and my fellow Coast Guard retirees, we need your help in ending this shutdown. Garrett, a Virginian working as a contractor at NASA. I'm a contractor for NASA. I'm shut down and I'm not very happy. This is having a negative financial effect on my life. I'm okay today, but soon, in the very next few days, when I have exhausted my vacation, then take leave without pay, then have to pay for overpriced health insurance, then I will be in a big pinch. As a contractor, we're not guaranteed to be reimbursed for our leave. The last shutdown, I lost a paycheck I never got back. It was something like a 2% pay cut. I won't be able to take sick leave or vacation this year. Something has to be done, and I'm relying on you to make it happen. We all are. Just think of all the good government employees that will be forced to leave the government because it is such a negative place to work. Government employees being forced to leave the government. Today in Fairfax, the Fairfax public school system is having a hiring fair just for federal employees. They need substitute teachers. They need bus drivers. They need cafeteria workers. And so they're doing a hiring fair to try to play upon the unhappiness of federal employees who are out for the shutdown and don't think that they're going to come back to work. Phil from Chesterfield. Through no fault of my own, I'm not being paid my biweekly salary tomorrow. This will cause a significant strain on my family, my church contributions, my shared health care cost, my retirement contributions. Having a college student attend Virginia Commonwealth University with winter semester fees for tuition and room and board totaling thousands of out-of-pocket is extremely frustrating. I can't go for a long time without a salary. Long-term policy disagreements among both parties of our elected senators using federal government employees' salaries as a token to rally off is not democracy. This is not fair to you or to a career professional like me who works for the United States government. I ask you to consider a CR which would fund our government through a short-term solution until you and your bipartisan colleagues can fix a long-term problem. My family and I are out of funding now. I ask that you publicly announce what you will do and help lead the bipartisan change to help Virginians. A family from Loudoun County won a 20-year government employee. I'm scared not knowing when I'll get paid. Our 2 young children should be signing up for spring sports this week, but we're cutting out optional spending. We're eating out of the food pantry instead of going to the grocery store. Real people are hurting, working and not being paid. It's 800,000, but the broader fear and economic impact is tremendous. Opal from Hampton. My name is Opal, and my husband Kenny is an inspector with the FDA. As you know, he has been unable to go to work for the past few weeks. I'm writing to you to keep our story and our situation at the forefront of your agenda. Please continue to push for our congressional leaders to get the government open. It's really hard to explain to our 9-year-old why Daddy isn't going to work and why Mom and Dad are having trouble paying their bills. This shutdown is wrong, and I feel that it's also wrong for federal employees to not be able to go to work because a person, some people elected president, wants an extreme form of security. Please, sir, reopen the government. Many people's lives are at stake. Daniel from Arlington. I'm a furloughed employee in the Department of Commerce. My income has stopped. I've become aware that I will soon be responsible to make payments for my family's health care, my life insurance, and other benefits that are normal paycheck deductions. So now I have no income plus these unbudgeted expenses. I have some hard decisions now with regard to paying my rent, paying for my family's health care, and paying for care for my elderly parents. I've applied for unemployment assistance. I'm trying to find work to survive throughout the shutdown. I have 5 years of federal service, and I've experienced furloughs before. Until now, I've not needed to take resources away from the unemployment system. Until now, I haven't had to compete in the job market to take a position away from someone who has no job at all. But I'm personally shut down. I'm using as little gasoline as I can. I'm only shopping for necessities. I'm cutting back in every money-saving way that I can. This is a disheartening way to just try and survive. Please try and support legislation that will return furloughed federal employees to paid work status. Final story, Joey from Warrenton. My husband is a highly experienced PhD economist with the SEC. I'm a disabled, thanks to cancer, Episcopal priest. We're in free fall, not knowing if my husband will have his job again, and our health insurance we need for my cancer. We need every penny he earns, and no job could replace his compensation. We spent most of our savings paying off my $40,000 in cancer and cancer-related bills just last year. Still, we live modestly in a 1,700-square-foot old farmhouse with no central air or heat, drive a 13-year-old car and another old used Subaru. It's early Thursday morning, January 10, and I'm having a panic attack, wondering if I'll lose my dogs if we get evicted, in case this runs a few months and we run out of savings to pay our mortgage. We have no family support or backup. We have a son with anxiety and ADHD issues for which we spend thousands of out-of-pocket dollars because mental health services for young people are either unavailable or don't accept insurance. Please continue to pressure all your colleagues to bring opening the government to a vote. Working Americans need protection. Mr. President, this is just a sample of the letters we've received, and when I come back from the session that Senator Warner and I are doing in Alexandria, I'll bring back more stories. But I know that other offices are receiving these same kinds of inquiries. Even with a guarantee of back pay, for so many people who live paycheck to paycheck or who have modest savings, the timing of even missing one paycheck is very, very critical. The House has already taken action by a strong majority to reopen government. By my count, just based on what folks have said in this chamber, there are at least 52 members of this chamber who have already gone on record and said we should take up the House bill and vote to reopen government. My hope is that when people listen to stories like this about lost paychecks and the effect on families, when people in this body understand the magnitude of tomorrow's record-breaking day when we establish the longest shutdown in the history of the country, as our colleagues are back in their home states over the weekend chatting with folks, that number of senators, 52, who want to take up these bills and vote them will increase, and that we can end this suffering that is so unnecessary. I will say this, I definitely get that there is an important controversy that needs resolution, talking about border security, talking about immigration reform. We've been talking about these issues since I got here, and regardless of your position on how we should solve them, I think everybody in the body knows no immigration reform done since 1986. Border security funding, a perennial topic. There is an important issue to resolve in this. How much should we spend for border security? What's the right way to spend the money? What's the right place to get the money? Can it be done by executive fiat, or must it be done via congressional appropriation? What are the immigration reforms that we need, having not done an immigration reform bill since 1986? When the president says these are important issues, he's not wrong, he's right. But the idea that even with an issue of importance on the table that we need to grapple with, that people who are unconnected to that issue have to be victims, have to suffer as we're trying to resolve that issue, I just don't get it. And some of those who are suffering are even, it's kind of even counter to the national emergency or crisis that the president is talking about. So, for example, the Coast Guard, as was indicated by one of my stories, Terry, the Coast Guard is one of the agencies, because it's under the Department of Commerce, I believe, that is shuttered. They're not a DOD agency, and so they're not funded. 42,000, I believe, Coast Guard employees. Most are essential and are working without pay, but some are furloughed. If there's a crisis at the border, and as the president described that crisis, some of the crisis, a significant portion of the crisis, is illegal drugs coming across the border, and we need folks to interdict illegal drugs, why would we shutter the Coast Guard? The Coast Guard has many missions, but one of their important missions, and they work very well on this in tandem with other agencies in this country and other countries, is the interdiction of illegal drugs. How does it make sense, if there is a crisis at the border dealing with drug importation, for the Coast Guard to be shuttered? So the president's statement that this is an issue that needs a resolution is correct, but punishing people who are unconnected to the issue, or even punishing some of the very people who we need to solve the issue, is just the wrong approach. And that's why I believe the right approach is the approach taken by the House, bringing up bills that were bipartisan bills that were worked on and voted on either by Senate committees or on the Senate floor, and saying, let's just do these. Let's reach an agreement for the non-affected agencies, the non-immigration related agencies between now and September 30, and reopen government. And let's provide short-term funding, a month or 3 weeks funding for the immigration and homeland security agencies. And let's just make the whole next chunk of time in this body a discussion of and a resolution of and a compromise that will enable us to meet some of what the president wants and some of what we want. And that's possible. You know, I think sometimes the word that goes out from a shutdown, or the word that goes out from some of the news stories, is, well, there's not going to be a compromise that's possible. The sides are dug in. We can't find an accord. I just want to remind the body, and the president knows this, it was just last February where 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans worked and introduced a bill that coupled border security with protection for dreamers. The president now is asking for $5.7 billion essentially in border security. The bill that we had in February is $25 billion over 10 years, $25 billion, which was exactly to the penny that the president had asked for. $25 billion, border security done right. We wanted to exercise traditional congressional oversight in the then 2 Republican House Congress over how the money would be spent, but the amount the president asked wasn't the problem. It wasn't the problem at all. $25 billion in exchange for something else that the president had asked for. He had said, we shouldn't protect dreamers by executive order. It should be done by Congress. There should be a statutory congressional fix, and he's right about that. That's a better thing to fix it via statute than to rely on an executive action, which can change with the whim of each new executive. He was right about that. And so we basically went to him with a proposal. 16 of us introduced the bill. $25 billion, Mr. President, that's what you asked for. Protection for dreamers, Mr. President, that's what you asked for. And the response from the White House was not to say, I don't like that deal, let me give you a counter, or could you add this to it? Within less than 24 hours, the White House put out a press release attacking those who put the bill together, even the Republicans, as proponents of open borders, who wanted to end immigration enforcement as we know it. It was a press release from the DHS that read like it was somebody's campaign literature, rather than the response that you would expect from a White House or cabinet level official. But what that offer showed is there is great willingness in this body to invest in border security. In fact, we put that bill, even after the president poured cold water on it, we put that bill on the floor for a vote. 46 out of 49 Democrats voted for it. 46 out of 49 Democrats voted for $25 billion in border security. Just like more than 50 Democrats in 2013, and I was part of this as well, voted for more than $40 billion in border security. So for folks at the White House wondering whether they're in a 3-week or month-long intense discussion, could we find a path forward on border security and immigration reform, the evidence is out there that yes, we can. We can find that path forward. But we ought to open up government and let those unconnected with the dispute at least go back to work. At least go back to work and start getting paid. And then in this body, which is a great deliberative body with 100 people who are very savvy and smart and who can find a deal moving forward, we can find an answer to this that would enable the president to say he got significant investments in border security and would also enable those of us who have promoted common sense immigration reforms to feel like there was something in there as well. So, Mr. President, with that, I'm going to yield the floor. I'm going to go to meet with federal employees and then return to share some of their stories. But my ask is a simple one. We need to reopen government. We need to lift the burden of this anxiety over people. And the last thing I'll say is now, if this back pay bill passes and the president signs it, why would we, if we're going to pay people, if we're going to guarantee their pay, why wouldn't we want them to be serving? Wouldn't we rather have them, if they are going to be paid, wouldn't we want to have them serving Americans rather than not serving Americans during this time? And Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, this shutdown is not a negotiation situation. This is a hostage situation. For the past 3 weeks, Donald Trump has held 8